your safety culture. Is that correct?
Yep.
Mr. Wisman is a professional engineer in Pennsylvania with over 25 years of experience supporting clients with their environmental remediation, compliance, geotechnical, permitting, health and safety, and data management challenges. All of these, as you know, are challenges in the construction industry. Mr. Wisman has spent a large amount of his career supporting the global clients with challenging engineering projects, typically as the project manager or engineering lead, and often incorporating real-time monitoring and data management solutions. He's worked on many projects in the Bahamas, including the Ministry of Works, Bahama, ESSO, Shell, the Hotel Corporation, BPL, and others. Mr. Wisman was the project manager and remediation design lead for Geosyntec on the Ministry of Works-led Clifton Barrier Wall System. That was to stop the environmental damage caused by leaks. He has assisted clients on asset and integrity data management projects all over the world, including leading the development of British Petroleum's Global Environmental Integrity Management Program, which included risk reviews, facility inspections, compliance audits, emergency preparedness, and engineering competence requirements. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Chuck Wisman.
Great, thank you. I appreciate everyone coming today, and I wanted to just start by giving a little background. I've had the opportunity for a lot of my career to work with some of the major oil and gas companies on projects across the globe, and I wanted to give a little background on some of that, because I'm here presenting on safety with an engineering background, but a lot of my work, especially with major oil companies, has been finding ways to develop engineering procedures and guidance that integrate with safety and incorporating safety into construction management, and engineered systems. So it's a little different background than somebody who presents on safety and that's all they do, but this is a little bit about that background. ExxonMobil incorporated what's called an LPS, behavior-based safety program, and instilled that in all their contractors, and probably was one of the best companies out there to integrate safety into their operations, into their construction, into everything that they do. When you look at ExxonMobil as a company, I think there's a few reasons for operation and safety excellence that, over the last 3+ decades, they've been one of the, typically one of the top 5 companies in the world as far as size and profitability. Shell has incorporated a lot of life-saving rules that we'll talk about that are really their fundamental core values when it comes to safety. So they've done a good job of also developing guidance and interacting and involving safety into everything they do. And the root of what their program is really on their life-saving rules, the basic fundamental things that everybody should always remember when working for Shell. BP, many of you remember the horrific Gulf oil spill that occurred a while ago. Well, after that, they developed integrity management programs across every business unit. And I was involved helping them to develop their procedures and engineering guidance so that many things were looked at in the future so that situations like that would never occur, so that safety was integrated into engineering and into processes. Chevron also did a lot of engineering guidance standards with them over the years, and they also, on the environmental remediation and construction side, required LPS, behavior-based safety. So I hope by the end of this you'll understand more about that and understand some of the tools that are out there to help you in your workplace, for you and your staff, as well as your contractors and the work that they're doing out there so that everyone goes home safe. On the right, there's kind of the flow of the typical safety cultures. At the bottom, you might not be embracing safety, or maybe you start being reactive to safety after situations occur. Then you become more calculative. And what you really want to aspire to is to be proactive and really, at the top there, have behavior-based safety and behaviors be impacted. So it's just a fundamental of what everybody does, what everybody talks about and understands. And the photo here is what's I think, critical and a key message. Everybody, whether it's in the office or in the field, whether it's your own staff, whether it's a contractor, needs to go home in the same shape that they came to work. And what can we do to make sure that those risks are minimized and we remove some of those bad behaviors and situations, we train people and educate people and develop a good process here. So, there's a lot of reasons to have a good safety program. I see it improve morale, and I see when we use contractors and construction companies that have good safety programs, they typically have better efficiency, they typically have better performance in the field. So good safety usually leads to good production and just better efficiency overall. And I will say that people at the Ministry of Works, so co-workers as well as your contractors, they will want to work for you if you show that you care. And showing that you care about safety, I think, is fundamental. And there's a lot of benefits from that. So about behavior-based safety, the root of it is really on the pyramid that you see here. So you want to minimize or really remove these unsafe activities where people get injured, or the worst case, there's fatalities. So this pyramid tells you that the more you focus down here on learning lessons on the near misses, the more you'll prevent what's up here. So, we call it a good catch. Some people call it a near loss or safety observation. If I go to a site and I see something unsafe and I make note of it and we do something about it and we talk about it, that's capturing it down here so that we don't have the incident up above. And that's the root of behavior-based safety. So that not only do you do this, that it becomes instinctive. For me personally, less than a year into behavior-based safety license and working for ExxonMobil and Chevron in those programs, I started to realize when I went home and I would see something that could fall on my infant when I had young kids, I just instinctively would remove that. And that's where it turns into behavior, where you don't need to think about it, you just instinctively recognize a hazard. If I see somebody on a ladder and something looks unsafe, do something about it, you recognize it, and that's where it really gets into the behaviors. A couple of definitions up there. I like that, a process that creates a safety partnership between management and employees, and I'd add management and the firm and your contractors. I think many of you have been to sites or been out to different locations and have seen some contractors that work for you that might not be wearing steel-toe boots, that might be moving steel and heavy equipment and they're wearing sandals or flip-flops. Those are some fundamental first step issues that are things that we can change. And if we go and we stop work and we make them make that change or instill that culture in that company, hopefully you'll never see that again in the future. And those are the things that we want to talk about here. Rex Tillerson was the CEO of ExxonMobil for many years. He embraced it, and what LPS, behavior-based safety, really focuses on the stewardship. If it comes from the leadership of the company, and you're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk, that's where you can really instill things. And the importance of the leadership is so key. Leadership will determine our safety performance, and it starts with leadership because leadership drives behavior, behavior drives a culture. And if there's one firm I ever saw that had a safety culture that was behavior-based, like no other, and really integrated, it was ExxonMobil. So last week I was at a dinner and the former head of ExxonMobil Exploration Production for the Globe was there. And I was able to sit down to him and talk about operation, integrity management, safety. And he told me a story that someone nicked their finger on a utility knife on the exploration side at ExxonMobil, many levels down from this person. But he had to personally go in front of Rex Tillerson and talk about it, talk about why it happened, talk about what they were going to do, what the lesson learned was, and what they were going to do to fix that. And from that situation, which some people might think is a little situation, and for one executive to go to a major CEO and have a discussion about it, that's pretty significant. It shows that it's impactful. And what they started doing after that is they required you couldn't have an open blade knife anymore. You had to have a retractable knife if you needed to use that tool. And they really educated people on using the right tool for the job, and the fact that certain type of open blades that weren't automatically retractable were banned from that point forward. So little incident, big lesson learned, and incorporated throughout the company. And one president of an operating unit having to go to CEO about it for something that happened. So a couple different things to talk about. So again, another major oil company, one thing that was pretty eye-opening for me, it was probably around 1997, 1998, that one of the major oil companies used to have thousands of contractors report up to them that would contract directly to them. And what they said, we're going to change things here on the engineering environmental side. We're going to go to 6 core contractors. We're going to train them, we're going to get them to buy into our culture, and we're going to make sure that they're hiring all those other subcontractors and they're managing them every day. And to me, this was kind of eye-opening. At first, it was a tremendous amount of work and other subcontractors. And those 6 firms, the ones that really bought into it, I'd say 4 of them really rose to the top and got the predominant amount of work for that major oil company. And it worked well, and it was a way that a large firm was able to take significant work and have other engineering contractors work and support for them and help them manage safety and help them manage, timelines, deliverables, costs, and it was a pretty big effort in project management and a shift. But a big part of it was the safety aspect, because the behavior-based safety was a part of it. And that slide on the right just shows some of the things we'll talk about as the key concepts here. So we talked about leadership, some things that you could do. Yes?
Excuse me, you keep using the acronym LPS, but I don't think you define what a
Yes,
was.
great question. LPS is a loss prevention system. It's a licensed behavior-based safety program. There's a lot of behavior-based safety programs out there, and LPS was one that you can get a license.
Loss prevention system.
Yes, and it was a PhD out of Penn State who worked for ExxonMobil, who saw an opportunity to develop a specific program that companies could get a license to. Let's say I was an engineering company, or I'm the Ministry of Works, and I get a license for LPS. Their leadership of that company at LPS would come in, make sure you understand the fundamentals, and teach you, coach you, and help you put a system in place. And there's other types of behavior-based safety programs, but that's a great question. So the leadership and stewardship, very important. Some of the things that that I talk about is the metrics. Are you putting goals in place? Let's say you have a new construction project on Eleuthera or in Grand Bahama Island, and it's a 6-month project. Maybe you set goals for the contractor that's out there that, hey, I'd like to see 6 safety reports or lessons learned each month, a minimum of that, and set some type of metric or goal and talk about it. Or you want to see notes from periodic safety meetings. So the walk the walk is important, because if you're just talking about it at a leadership level, it might not get instilled. And you can change any safety culture anywhere. The Borco facility at Grand Bahama Island, I remember visiting that facility 8 years ago, and then I visited shortly after Buckeye took ownership of it, and I start to see how they start to change the safety culture. One of the first things they did is they painted little fish near every storm sewer to educate people that, hey, anytime you put oil into the storm sewer, it goes into the ocean and it could get into the fish that we eat. And it was little steps that they initially took to try to educate people on that bad behavior. We don't want to do that anymore. We want to change things as much as we can. I mentioned Shell's life-saving rules. So if you work for Shell, you pretty much need to memorize the life-saving rules here. They have an image for each one, and some of them are as simple as wearing your seatbelt. If you're on a Shell facility and they see, or a site, and they see you not wearing a seatbelt, that is not a good thing. So a lot of different aspects here, but this is an example of how any company, Ministry of Works can say, hey, these are our 4 guiding rules, our guiding principles. Wear PPE, have a safety meeting every morning when somebody's at a site, or talk about safety before any meeting starts. So you can make it simple. This is a program that really grew. Don't use a cell phone when you're driving. Some of the key hazards that they found are critical. And I'll mention about, because this is something that people do all the time. We worry about drunk drivers, people who might be on drugs driving, right? They're looking out the windshield and they're not thinking properly if somebody's intoxicated. Somebody who's distracted by looking at their phone are actually taking their eyes off what's in front of them. So there's many people who think that's, it's just as bad or worse to be looking at your phone or on your phone when you're driving than being intoxicated. So just, for some companies, they've really set the standard in driving those rules. One basic thing you can start with is, for all your contractors, your employees going to sites, make sure they have the right tools for the task. And a tool for the task is your personal protective equipment, your PPE. I've been on sites where contractors in the Bahamas, like I said, are wearing sandals or flip-flops, and they're carrying heavy loads. If something falls, something really bad could happen. And steel-toe boots should be a minimum in that situation. Wearing the right gloves, the right hearing protection if you're working around loud equipment. For your contractors, you can set the standard, and then you can measure your contractors by that standard. And that's probably like the first step that I would recommend. And then, from a leadership standpoint, if any of us get to go to a site or situation, we should try to do at least 2 of these things. Whether it's just have a quick safety meeting, identify a good catch situation that maybe we should think about. Just ask questions about safety. If somebody's doing something the right way or doing something good, give them positive feedback. And that's a big part of behavior-based safety, is making it positive. It's not that people are getting reprimanded for things. There's a peer-to-peer aspect of it that you're guiding and helping. So we showed the pyramid previously, and we talked about how to make sure we don't have incidents or fatalities at the end of the day. So these are all the things that we do to try to do that. We talked about the stewardship, like a job safety analysis. That's where if somebody's doing a task at a site, they have a detailed procedure. If it's electrical work, that there's lockout, tagout procedure they understand and look at, and that they're the right person for that job. I talked about the observation, so I tell you, maybe I work with you, you're overseeing what I'm doing, and we're giving feedback to each other on that task. We talked about some of the good catches, so the bottom 4 things prevent the top 2 things. And the other important thing, as we get these observations, if we see an incident, we learn what the root cause was. And this is from LPS, and any kind of behavior-based safety will go through this process. So let's say I had a near miss or good catch that I caught. It was a trip hazard and we took care of it. Well, we look at what was the root cause of that. Was it a personal factor that it happened? Was it an organizational factor? Or was it an external factor? It's usually personal, sometimes organizational. But you circle back and you learn the lesson learned, and you educate people. You have a discussion about it. Maybe once a month you talk about what were all the lessons learned we've had in this previous month, and you tell all your contractors about it so that they don't have that problem again too. And I'll give you one good example, because I always would look at engineering ones for like water treatment systems. And I remember it was probably in the late 90s, we probably had maybe 3 or 4 overflows of water treatment systems where a sensor didn't work, a pump failed, and water actually flowed out over a tank and onto the ground, sometimes out in a facility into a storm sewer. And so what we decided to do was, hey, for every new system we design, we're gonna put a sensor in the floor so that this whole system shuts off if water ever spills, and it will never go outside. And so that became just an example of how we would never have that situation again. And we also went back to existing systems and did that. And we had a system recently we put in at Papamar, and we, that was just a part of the design when the system showed up, water treatment system, there was floor sensors. And we've had, I think, a couple of situations where a small hose broke and, water spilled onto the floor and it shut down the whole system, and that was good. We had another situation where rain came sideways into the louvers and got water on the floor and it shut down the system, which was fine. And we put a guard to make sure that rainwater didn't get in anymore. So that's just an example of, good catch and then learning from that and making it change. And these were just 2 good catches. I might have shared these in my information management talk, but this is where a new curb was put in around an oil storage tank. And for a few days after that was installed, there was still loose soil here, and people were walking along this area. If they would have put a foot over in this area, they might have twisted an ankle because it was loose soil and caved in down there. So, after seeing this situation here, put more soil, compacted it, and everything was level. In this situation, this was a platform on concrete. There was a piece of rebar that was left. There was also a small step here that was a trip hazard. So we took this out and then we put sand all around here. But these were caught as good catches on our system. And just, some stats here. For every workplace fatality there is in our industry, there are at least 300,000 at-risk behaviors and 3,000 near misses. So these are a lot of opportunities to catch lessons learned and to prevent this. You never want to have anyone get hurt, let alone anybody have a fatality. And near misses are a warning. If you look at the root cause, if you keep seeing that the root cause was because we're not training our people, well then that's on us. We need to train our people and make sure we're doing a better job. And this is on my phone. I can make a report. If I see a good catch, I can pull up procedures and so forth. The easier we make it for people to capture a good catch, the more you're gonna get. People, I see all the time, people do good catches in the office. Let's say there's a trip hazard, an extension cord somewhere. They do a good catch, they fix it, they take care of the problem. That's a great thing, and that, again, that becomes instinctive, hopefully, as we help with people's behaviors there. And I can't overemphasize, communicate lessons learned back to staff. And if one contractor has an issue with something in a near loss and you learn from it, get that data and get that information to the other contractors that do work for Ministry of Works. So, just an example, Ministry of Works can set goals for each project, as I mentioned. You can have the contractors track this information and report it back to you. So far, all you had to do at this point was just set a goal. And it's on the contractors to report and send it back to you. And then all you need to do is, I have a little typo there, but the lessons learned, communicate lessons learned with all staff and all contractors. And get that back out. So that's just an example. I talked about peer-to-peer observations. This photo just describes it very well. They're working together. This person's doing some work at electrical, and they're talking about the task before just one person dives in and starts doing it and could get injured. So that's good. An SPSA is a safe performance self-assessment. And again, when you're in a behavior-based mode, you're basically walking in a situation and instinctively you see what's around you. You might see the hazard on the floor. You might see something that could hit your head over here. And it instinctively, you analyze it and you act. So that's the fundamental aspect of it. I also added this other thing on here too, because a lot of companies have done good to develop short service worker programs. So let's say you have a contractor doing some significant work out at a pier or a dock or wherever, and maybe they have 8 laborers who show up one day. Maybe you find out that 2 of them, it's their first time ever working for that company. And has that company developed any short service worker program that, what makes them competent and trained to do the job they're there for? Because I'll tell you what, probably the highest risk of anything happening at that site are those people who are inexperienced, never worked for that company. Do they even care? What can we do to make sure there's a short service worker program in place? And I see a lot of companies instill that in contractors. and make sure that that doesn't happen, because those are high risks. So, when I think of steps to improve the safety performance of your contractors, we talked about this, the visible leadership, but how about inspecting and monitoring the job sites? I was at a site with Mr. Rob Moses over there, and we saw some unsafe behaviors of contractors, and Rob shut down work and told them to get off site and talk to the contractor. And I think in that situation, the contractor might have hired another contractor. That was a good example of somebody visiting a site and doing something about it, and ensuring that doesn't happen again. Requiring the daily safety meetings. Years ago, a lot of companies would require a morning, what they would call a tailgate meeting, and then other companies learned that, it's good to have a little safety talk after people get back from their lunch break, and it's good to have a safety talk at the end of the day to talk about what tasks we're doing tomorrow so we're prepared, and if we need any other equipment as well. So that could be up to 3 or more discussions a day. Making sure we do the root cause analysis, the metrics we talked about, the task-specific procedures. One of the root cause that always comes up is somebody's doing a task and they didn't really have a good procedure. They weren't trained, they didn't know how to do it. And that's one way to incorporate that. And incident reporting, we've talked about that. So that's 9 key steps, and you can take incremental steps as well. So when you look at scorecards, think of somebody's performance. If you have an employee who works for you, or you working for your boss, we all work better when we know our goals. We all work better when we have something that's a metric to achieve. Same with contractors. If some of those metrics are in safety, they're going to step up their game. If they know that they're more likely to win more work if they're a great safety performer, are you incorporating safety into your bid and proposal reviews when you do RFPs? This is something that could go for full circle. And one of the easiest ways to get somebody's performance up as a contractor is have a scorecard. When that project is done, say, we're going to sit down, we're going to see how you did financially, we're going to see how you did time-wise, how you did with the scope, how the quality was, and hey, here's 6 metrics we want to look at how you perform safety-wise. And we're going to give you a score on a scale of 0 to 100 for everything, including the 6 safety metrics or whatever metrics you come up with. They're going to elevate their game pretty significantly if you have scorecards like that. And scorecards are a big part of safety performance monitoring. There's also ways that you can use external resources. A lot of companies use ISNetworld, and they'll tell contractors, hey, I need you to put your insurance and your safety metrics and performance as a company into ISNetworld. RFPs will only go out to the companies that have good ratings in ISNetworld. So that's an example of how you don't have to take on the administrative burden at the Ministry of Works. There's other programs out there you can just tell your contractors that they have to put their information into. It also makes sure they have the right levels of insurance, which is pretty critical if something major happens at one of your sites as well. So again, that's just a picture of my phone and that app that I can pull up to get that information. So having those procedures, one of these tabs, anybody, whether it's a contractor or your own staff, can pull up the procedure. That's pretty huge. And those procedures you don't need to write yourself. I think ExxonMobil really did a great job of this. Is the contractors, as they did work, they would develop the procedures, and then every day that would go by, those procedures would be updated based on safety lessons learned and best practices and so forth. So after a couple of years, their list of best practices and procedures is pretty awesome. And then learning management systems. So there's a lot of companies out there that provide some really good tools on different type of safety training. I just got an email from my company that I'm due for my Smith driver training that I have to go online to take. But computer-based things that Ministry of Works could invest in and get all staff, whether you're in an office, whether you're in your field, or whether it's a contractor, require these are the fundamental 3 or 4 key things that we're going to start with. And again, you don't have to you don't have to pay for an internal staff or group to do that training. You use outside resources that are more web-based that are pretty low cost these days. So it's a lot easier. Some of the training ideas, I just made a list of some key things. A couple of us were talking earlier about electrical safety. So, there's many aspects of electrical safety. And the first and foremost is know when you need to bring an electrician, which is pretty much anytime you're working around electrified equipment. The crane safety, forklifts. I've seen some pretty crazy things here locally on different construction projects. Working at heights and not being tied off to something. There's some pretty simple things here. Confined space entry. I've seen people go, try to go into tanks that really might not have good oxygen levels in there. Don't do that. Do we need to be tagging that out? Like this here is where you have a sign at that entry point, and you remind people, this is a confined space. You need a permit to access this tank, and trying to protect them. And other safety items, list of different things here. Some situations you might need eye washes, just basic fire extinguishers, has it expired? Have we checked it? Do people know where they are? Ergonomics for people who work in the office. I have a degenerated disc and a herniated disc in my back, so ergonomics is at the top of my list right now of trying to be careful on how I do things. Now, we're talking safety, but a lot of people say health, safety, security in the environment, HSSE. That second S isn't safety, another safety, it's security. So there's a lot of things you can do now. I know when I talked on the information management discussion a couple of months ago, we talked about some of this, but it's really easy these days to get cameras out at your job sites and photo document things. And you have a lot of challenges when you have construction sites because they're on many different islands and you might be here. So you have contractors sometimes with little oversight because they're far away, and maybe you can feel closer to it and track it and monitor the progression by having some cameras at the site. And then also reporting, again, for some of these remote locations, you can have a form that somebody fills out that automatically comes back into that database that shows the progress every day. And sometimes you might get photos that come back in the monthly reports and you look and you say, why is that person wearing a hard hat? Or why is that person not wearing gloves? And you can report back to that contractor and say, hey, stop doing that. I noticed a good catch observation in your end of the day figures. But so some of this could be automated like we talked about in the information management discussion. And then if you automate it, statistics and other information can be tracked. If there's an injury, you can have a little form that comes up that shows that the person was injured on their hand, might have a photo of the situation, and you're able to be very close to it.